All right, this is my recording for the informative speech. Timer starts now. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another segment of The Accounting Zone. I'm your host, Isaac Chang, and today we'll be discussing one of the most talked about topics in the business world. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about taxes. Specifically, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. You might know them as the Trump tax cuts. This act, which was passed in December of last year and took effect on January 1, had a major impact in the lives of Americans around the world. Some examples of the changes it brought were that it reduced most income tax rates for individuals and modified the tax brackets for those taxpayers. In addition, the act increased the standard deduction and child tax credit, as well as repealed deductions for personal exemptions, certain itemized deductions, and the alternative minimum tax. The basic purpose of the tax cut was to put more money in taxpayers' pockets, or at least that's what the American people were promised. So, as 2018 comes to a close, the question on everyone's mind is, was this promise kept? Well, the simple truth is that you would be hard-pressed to find a definitive answer to whether the tax cuts have been beneficial or not. It seems that the media has taken a very black and white approach to the new tax laws. Where some news outlets say the tax cuts have been an amazing success, others would say that they've been a massive disaster, and still others say that the tax cuts have had no effect at all. For example, Fox News published an article concerning the tax cuts' effects on the rapid job growth in the country. In regard to the economy, the article stated that, and I quote, "The tax cuts that took effect this year are fueling this economic fire by allowing hard-working Americans and businesses to keep more of what they earn. More money in the private economy where it can be spent and invested stimulates main streets across the country." The article went on to quote that small businesses across the U.S. are using their tax cut savings to raise wages, create jobs, and expand. These statements are accompanied with a host of numbers describing the job growth of the country in recent years. However, the article fails to compare these numbers with the growth of previous years before the tax cut was implemented. This is where the bias of the article is shown. By not showing the reader how these figures compare to previous years, we can conclude that Fox News is more focused on praising the new tax cuts than it is on reporting how it has affected the state of the economy as a whole. But Fox News isn't the only news outlet guilty of bias. In an article published by USA Today concerning the new tax law, author Stan Collender stated that, quote, "Last year's big tax cut bill significantly increased the federal budget deficit." The article goes on to state that the tax cuts have caused the country's deficit to rise to heights not seen since 2009. Although the article is not wrong about this rising federal deficit, it fails to mention that a rising deficit is normal and has been apparent not just in this administration, but in the past administrations as well. One more thing I would like to add is that the tax cuts were passed not only to put money in the pockets of citizens, but also to increase the revenues of companies. It is theorized that these companies begin to take more revenue, and once this happens, the country will begin to take more revenue as well. With that being said, it is impossible to say whether or not the tax cut will end up lessening the federal deficit in the long run or not. USA Today's goal in publishing the article is painfully obvious then. By drawing unnecessary attention to rising deficit and spending no time discussing the overall economic growth that the American people have been experiencing in recent years, it can be concluded that the only purpose of the article is to discredit the current administration and to falsely blame Republican legislation for increasing the federal deficit. A more balanced view of the tax cuts can be found in an article by the Washington Post, entitled "How the Economy Has Fared Since Trump's Tax Cuts Were Passed." The article stipulates that Trump's tax cuts have had virtually no effect on the nation's current economic state, and that the economy's growth since the new tax cut is simply a continuation of the economy's consistent growth over the years. Unlike Fox News, the Washington Post showed the economic growth experienced in the nation compared to the growth of previous years. What they found was that the tax cuts' effects have not altered the growth of the economy in a significant way. Now, all this seems to be sound reporting, and the Washington Post does an excellent job at painting a balanced view of the tax cuts in this article. In summary, all the articles here present their own agendas and biases, yet through critical thinking we can come to a more balanced conclusion. This conclusion is that although the economy hasn't experienced a drastic spike since the new tax laws have been signed, the fact remains that the economy is on the rise, and tax cuts have certainly not impeded this growth. As for the rising deficit, this is nothing new and follows the USA's general trend of spending more than it earns. To add on, it's impossible to say that the tax cuts are going to hasten the rise of the deficit. Make of that what you will, ladies and gentlemen, because ultimately, the final say is up to you. And that concludes this segment of the Accounting Zone. This is Isaac Chang, signing off. 5 minutes, 37 seconds.